Part 7. I Can See the Laws of Things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 61. He took a deep breath and suddenly clenched his fist. In an instant, the will of power in his body was activated. A punch with a tenfold increase. He shouted and instantly hit his chest with his fist. There was a huge metal collision sound. He only felt a roar in his ears, his blood surging, and his body retreated again and again. But the next moment, he was shocked to find that except for a little dizziness, he had no other injuries. He looked at his chest and saw that it was only slightly red. Even the skin was not broken. Lin En murmured, "This defense is a bit scary. I have a full 80,000 kilograms of force, but it only made my skin red. Then, what is the limit of my defense? If I use a punch with a 100-fold increase in force to punch myself, what will happen?" Lin En swallowed his saliva and considered whether to conduct an experiment. If he didn't die, it means that his defense is strong enough to withstand the destruction of 800,000 kilograms of force. If I die... Lin En turned his head, his mouth twitched slightly and said, "Forget it, I won't do this experiment." For the next 2 days, Lin En was exercising at home. During this period, Chen Daoming came to drink with him again. On the 3rd day, Chen Daoming came to his home again and said goodbye to him. As a world-class god of law, he can't stay in Jianghai City for too long. Zhuzhu Domain needs him to guard. Lin En, I am very much looking forward to the day when we meet in Zhuzhu Domain. I hope that when we meet again, you have grown to a point that I will look at you with new eyes. On the morning of the 3rd day, still on the rooftop where they discussed the law that night, Chen Daoming turned his head and looked at Lin En with his hands behind his back. Lin En hugged his shoulders and said, "Are you going back today?" Chen Daoming nodded and said, "Since my daughter has recovered, staying here will only arouse suspicion from others." After that, he turned his head to look at Lin En and took out a black box from his arms. "Take this." Lin En glanced at him, took the box hesitantly, and said, "What is this?" Chen Daoming smiled slightly and said, "Haha, just treat it as a gift for you. Don't worry, this thing will definitely be of great use to you." Lin En tossed the box and said, "Then I'll take it? Do you need me to give it to you?" Chen Daoming laughed and said, "Why bother with so much courtesy? When I return to Zhuzhu, I will provide you with financial assistance through special channels. We will contact each other then. Let's say goodbye here." Lin En nodded. Chen Daoming smiled slightly, waved his sleeves, and the space around him broke open instantly, and his body immediately disappeared from the spot. After sending Chen Daoming off, Lin En returned home. The news that Chen Daoming left Jianghai City soon appeared on TV. The news that he became the Chen family's venerable is now only known to people within the Chen family, but he has a vague premonition that this matter will soon be known to everyone. And by that time, many bad things will probably happen. In the next few days, Lin En continued to practice at home. His practice speed was very fast. In just 3 days, his blood and qi reached the level of an intermediate extraordinary warrior. Boom! A loud noise. In the test area of the martial arts hall, accompanied by a huge roar, the machine for testing fist strength instantly sank. At the same time, a bright number appeared on the display screen. 20,000 kilograms. Lin En took a deep breath and looked at the value he had hit with satisfaction. In 3 days, his basic fist strength increased by more than 12,000 kilograms. If such a fist strength is added with the increase of the will of power, the fist strength he can hit can easily exceed 200,000 kilograms. Lin En, you really can bring us surprises every day. Zhang Heiran, the head of the martial arts hall, took a deep breath and looked at the value on the test instrument speechlessly. Since the relationship between Chen Daoming and Lin En was made public in the high-level circles of Jianghai City, Zhang Heiran also knew that Lin En is now a respected person of the Chen family. Compared with these masters, the Chen family's venerables are many levels higher than them in terms of status. However, the people who know Lin En's identity now are limited to him and the four masters. The Chen family did not disclose Lin En's identity. Lin En smiled and said, "Haha, thank you for arranging a private practice place for me. After all, there are many inconveniences in practicing at home." So after Lin En told the masters about his troubles, the masters almost immediately arranged a private practice place for him. One in the martial hall and one in each of the other four mage halls. After saying goodbye to Zhang Heiran, Lin En drove home. After saying hello to the people in the community, he walked into the apartment building. Report: the target has left the martial hall and is now home. No abnormalities were found. What no one noticed was that on the floor opposite to Lin En's community, a black shadow was hidden in the window, and a beam of light could be vaguely seen flashing through the telescope lens. "Excuse me, do you want to continue monitoring?" "Continue." An emotionless voice came from the phone. After returning home, Lin En came to the bedroom and closed the curtains. He sat on the chair with his shoulders folded, looking at the curtains and squinting his eyes. Since the second day after Chen Daoming left Jianghai City, he found that he was being monitored. In his community, he found at least 3 monitoring points for him, and when he was out, there were several mobile points that continued to monitor him 24 hours a day. In addition, he could not determine their identities for the time being. People from the Chen family, or other people with ulterior motives. Lin En narrowed his eyes. This is the 3rd day that he has been monitored. No one likes to have their every move monitored by others, and Lin En is no exception. "I gave you 3 days to think about it." Lin En hugged his shoulders expressionlessly and said. "Since you are not going to leave yet, don't blame me for being rude. Being monitored by others is infuriating no matter how you think about it." Soon, night fell. Lin En, who was lying on the bed, opened his eyes. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. There was no moon tonight and it was dark outside. He got up quietly, opened the door and came to his sister's bedroom. King Ian was lying on the bed with a doll in her arms, breathing steadily. Lin En's eyes showed a trace of warmth, and then he gently touched her forehead. His sister was the most important person to him, which was why he did not immediately alert the person who was monitoring him. If King Ian was hurt because of him, he would never forgive himself. "Brother," King Ian opened her eyes sleepily. "I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 62. Lin En touched her head and took her up from the bed with the quilt. Her body was as light as a feather, soft and boneless. King Ian subconsciously wrapped her arms around his neck, looked up at Lin En's face blankly, and said, "Brother, what are we going to do?" Lin En said gently, "Brother will take you to a place." King Ian blinked and said, "Okay." In the dark night, what no one noticed was that a hidden window on the 6th floor opened, and a figure flashed through the window. The next moment, the figure flew towards the sky like a flying bird. In the air, Lin En rode the strong wind and quickly passed through the clouds hundreds of meters high. King Ian curled up tightly in Lin En's arms, opened her eyes wide, and exclaimed, "Brother! When did you learn to fly? So amazing." Lin En smiled and said, "It's very simple. As a wind magician, it would be too embarrassing if I can't fly." King Ian looked at the brightly lit city below her feet, shouted, hugged Lin En's neck tightly, and said loudly, "It's so beautiful. This is the first time I have overlooked our Jianghai city from such a high place." Lin En smiled and said, "If you like, I can take you flying often in the future." King Ian's eyes lit up, hugged Lin En's neck, and said, "Then we have a deal. You are not allowed to lie to me." "Haha, how could I lie to you?" "Great. Brother, I love you," King Ian shouted. A few minutes later, Lin An hugged King Ian and landed silently on the high building of the Martial Hall. Then he opened a window and came to the interior of the Martial Hall. King Ian looked around curiously. She didn't know why her brother brought her here so late, but she was not worried at all, because she knew that no matter what her brother did, it was definitely for her own good. A moment later, Lin An came to a luxurious hotel-style room. Turning on the light, Lin An gently put King Ian on the soft bed and covered her with a quilt. King Ian, this is my private practice place in the Martial Hall. Don't worry, there are no outsiders here. You can rest well here tonight. I will come to pick you up tomorrow morning. King Ian nodded vigorously and looked at Lin An with some worry. She reached out and grabbed one of his fingers, and said worriedly, "Brother, are you going to do something very dangerous?" Lin An touched her face and smiled, "No, I just don't feel comfortable leaving you at home. You don't have to think too much, go to sleep." King Ian nodded. She would not cause trouble for her brother. She knew that her brother had important things to do. As long as she listened to her brother's arrangements, she would be the greatest help to her brother. "Then I'm leaving." Lin An patted her shoulder. King Ian shook her head, pointed at her face, and looked at him hopefully with a pair of clear eyes. Lin An had no choice but to gently touch her face. King Ian was satisfied and let go of his hand. "Brother," King Ian said, "no matter what, you have to be careful." A few minutes later, Lin An left the martial arts hall and came to the gate of the community. He looked up at the quiet community. He was not a passive person. A few days ago, when he was monitored by those people, he had already secretly figured out the location of those people. "No matter who you are," Lin An moved his wrist and said lightly. "It's really a bit irritating to monitor me without my permission." In a unit building opposite to Lin An's floor. It's 1:30 in the morning. Routine report. No abnormality was found. Report completed. A man in a black leather jacket quietly pulled open a corner of the curtain and monitored the opposite floor with a telescope. He had a communicator in his ear. Several different voices came from the channel. No abnormality was found in Area 3, report completed. No abnormality was found in Area 4, report completed. The man put down the telescope and closed the communication channel. The room was silent, no lights were on, and there was no other light except a ray of light coming in through the gap outside the window. He picked up the telescope and prepared to continue observing the apartment building opposite. But the next moment he picked up the telescope, a figure that was constantly enlarging suddenly appeared in his sight. His face changed drastically. And the next moment, a figure suddenly rushed in from the window, and under the huge force, the glass on the window and the entire wall shattered with a bang. The man instantly felt his throat being suddenly held by a hand like a steel clamp. The body was directly pulled up by the terrifying force. There was a loud bang. His body was pressed heavily on the opposite wall, and even the wall was directly sunken. You can imagine how terrible the power that controlled him was. The man looked at the man who was grabbing his throat in horror. His speed was too fast, and his strength was so terrible that it was unimaginable. This scene happened unexpectedly, and he had no time to react at all, and was controlled in an instant. Lin An, he looked at the figure in horror and recognized his face. Lin An grabbed his throat, looked at him expressionlessly, and said, "You have been monitoring me for a long time." The man instantly felt his hand tightening around his neck, and he felt suffocated. "When did you find me?" the man gritted his teeth. Lin An said expressionlessly, "You don't need to know this, you just need to answer me, who sent you here, and what is the purpose of monitoring me?" The man gritted his teeth and said nothing. Lin An couldn't help but smile, and said, "Haha, you are still a tough guy, but unfortunately, I like people like you." A purple light suddenly flashed across his eyes. He quickly constructed a wheel of rules on his fingers with his mental power. Pain. The moment he hit the wheel of rules on the man's body, the man suddenly opened his eyes wide. It was like countless ants were gnawing at his bone marrow. Pain. The pain spreading from all over the body, the uncontrollable pain. Lin An suddenly raised the pain level to 100 times the pain that an ordinary person could endure. In an instant, the man let out a shrill scream. "I'll tell you. I'll tell you." Lin An flicked his finger slightly and released the will of pain. The man was panting, his whole body was sweating profusely. He looked at Lin An, who was holding his neck in horror, as if he was looking at a demon. In that moment just now, he felt like he had walked through hell. "Tell me," Lin An said lightly, "who are you? What is the purpose of monitoring me? Don't let me repeat it a second time." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Xuanhuan. Chapter 63. The man was trembling all over, as if he had just been fished out of a deep pool, dripping with sweat. Looking into Lin An's dark eyes, he swallowed subconsciously, no longer daring to hide anything, and told Lin An everything he knew. After a moment, Lin An frowned, and a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes. The winner of the Kyushu domain. The winner is a middle-class family in the 9 provinces. Although they cannot compare with the 4 top families in the Kyushu region, they are equally powerful in the Kyushu region. Among them, the winner's head is a being who has reached the level of a god of war. Although he is not yet a world-class martial god, looking at the entire world, those who can become martial gods are all 1 in a million people. Lin An narrowed his eyes, looked at him, and said, "I have no interaction with the winner you call me. I'm curious, why did they send you all the way to spy on me?" If he hadn't heard about this family from his mouth today, Lin would never have even heard of this so-called winner in the Kyushu domain. The man kept panting and said, "I am just an intelligence officer responsible for monitoring you and your family. As for the reason for doing this, I don't know and I don't need to know." Lin An said calmly, "Tell me the position of your superior." The man gritted his teeth and said, "Lin, let me tell you, you'd better not provoke us. I'm not a combatant, but my superiors are different. If you anger us, you will die miserably." Lin An looked at him indifferently and said, "You don't have to worry about it anymore. You just need to tell me his location, and then your mission will be completed." The man's eyes flashed and he secretly clenched his fists. Jianghai City is a dozen-story skyscraper in the city center. In front of the huge floor-to-ceiling window, a middle-aged man wearing a black suit and a mustache sat on the sofa. He had a cigar in his mouth and a gold watch on his arm. He glanced at the 60-year-old man sitting opposite him in a wheelchair. If Lin An were here at this moment, he would definitely recognize at a glance that the old man sitting in the wheelchair is the head of the Qin family, Qin Kaiang, who was crippled by his punch before. "Head of the Qin family, thank you very much for your cooperation this time." The middle-aged man knocked the ashes from his cigarette and said calmly, "If it weren't for the information you provided, our winner would not have been able to obtain first-hand information about Chen Daoming in Jianghai City in the first place." Qin Kaiang said with a gloomy face, "I'm not interested in these. I just want to know, what are you going to do to that Lin An?" The middle-aged man said calmly, "Banmen is Chen Daoming's favorite little daughter, a genius who was a master from birth. Previously, because of her shortcomings in fate, the major families in the 9 provinces did not treat her very well. After all, she is a person who will die sooner or later, but now, someone has cured her disease, which is not good news for the major families in the Kyushu region." Qin Kaiang said gloomily, "What do you want to say?" The middle-aged man took a sip of his cigar and said, "The Chen family is already powerful. For them, 1 genius is enough, but now, the Chen family has 2 extremely talented people who are enough to dominate the world. The balance of the 9 provinces, there has been an imbalance, and if the number of geniuses increases to 3. He pressed the cigar in his hand on the table and twisted it hard. Then the future of the Jiuzhu territory will probably not tolerate other families besides our Chen family. Qin Kaiang narrowed his eyes, the beard on his face moved slightly, and said, "So, are you planning to attack that Lin En?" The middle-aged man said lightly, "A person who cured Miss Banman's injury, a person who was personally visited by Chen Daoming, even just one day after meeting, Chen Daoming couldn't wait to give it to Lin Enzun with such an extremely high position. If you are eager to pull that Lin En onto your warship, there are only 2 reasons. Either the power behind him is huge, and Chen Daoming wants to have a good relationship with the power behind him. Either his talent is amazing enough, so amazing that even Chen Daoming has to pay attention to it." Qin Kaiang said solemnly, "I have conducted a detailed investigation on Lin En before. Before Chen Daoming appeared, he had no background." The man took a deep breath and said expressionlessly, "The result is already obvious, isn't it? His talent is amazing enough, so amazing that even Chen Daoming has to show his kindness to him." Qin Kaiang said deeply, "You want to touch him? Aren't you afraid of the Chen family's revenge?" The middle-aged man said calmly, "The major families in the Jiuzhu region will not sit back and watch the Chen family dominate. Removing Miss Ban Meng will inevitably trigger a violent backlash from the Chen family. Relatively speaking, if a person with a foreign surname is removed, even if the Chen family wanted to take revenge, under the pressure of the major families, they had no choice but to give up." Qin Kaiang narrowed her eyes and said, "It seems there is someone behind your winner." The middle-aged man smiled faintly, looked at him, and said, "You don't need to know this, Qin Kaiang, you just need to know that after this mission is completed, our winner will be able to benefit, and so will your Qin family. Don't you always think, do you want to become the real first family in Jianghai City? You will be able to realize this wish soon." Qin Kaiang's eyes burst out with murderous intent. With a click, the railing of the wheelchair was directly crushed into mud by his hands. "My only wish now is to let him die, to make that Lin En die without a complete body." The middle-aged man stood up with a smile, adjusted his tie, and said, "It won't take too long. Tomorrow is the last day I will monitor that Lin En. After tomorrow, there will be no Lin En in this world anymore. I promise you." Qin Kaiang sneered, "Okay. As long as you speak, all the forces of our Qin family in Jianghai City are at your disposal." The middle-aged man stretched out his hand to him and smiled, "It's a pleasure to work with you." He hadn't finished speaking when something strange happened. The glass of the huge floor-to-ceiling windows shattered in an instant, and the violent wind blew the broken glass in, sweeping the entire hall in an instant. Puff! Puff! Caught off guard, countless broken glass pierced into the middle-aged man's back like bullets. The faces of the middle-aged man and Qin Kaiang changed drastically in an instant. The middle-aged man suddenly turned around and crossed his hands to protect his head. A burst of blood suddenly burst out from his body, forming an indestructible barrier in front of him, crushing all the glass into powder. "Who is it?" the middle-aged man suddenly roared. Outside the window, the night was dark. A violent gust of wind rushed in. Qin Kaiang faced the gust of wind and looked at the sky outside. The next moment, his pupils suddenly shrank, and great fear appeared in his eyes. Lin En. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 64. The middle-aged man's face changed, and he suddenly looked towards the dark night. Outside the window, a young man in sportswear hugged his shoulders, and countless strong winds swirled around him. He was just floating in the sky 50 stories high, staring at them expressionlessly. The middle-aged man felt as if he was facing a great enemy, and subconsciously took a step back, looking at him in shock, and said, How is this possible?" Lin En hugged his shoulders and said lightly, "I'm sorry to disturb your party, but I'm also very fortunate to be able to hear such explosive news here. The middle-aged man suddenly clenched his fists and stared at Lin En, and a drop of cold sweat slowly flowed from his forehead. Was he outside all the time just now? This is impossible. I am a great master. Even if the perception ability of a warrior cannot be compared with that of a mage, I didn't even feel his breath at such a close distance. Is this Lin En's strength so strong that even I can't sense it? How could he know? After Lin En engraved the will of heaven and earth, his body had become a microcosm of the world. In this world, let alone him, if Lin En didn't want to, even if a world-class magic god came, he would not be able to find out any information about him. The middle-aged man said gloomily, Lin En, how did you know I was here? He had a vague guess in his heart. The group of people who monitored Lin En might have been exposed. Lin En said lightly, are you talking about him? He raised his finger, and the next moment, a man wrapped in a gust of wind slowly appeared in their sight from downstairs. It was the man that Lin En had caught before. When the man saw the middle-aged man, his eyes showed an extremely frightened expression. Boss, save me. Save me. The middle-aged man's eyes suddenly became fierce, and the expression on his face immediately became extremely ferocious. He immediately knew what happened. With a chuckle, a broken glass pierced the man's throat. The man lowered his head in fear and watched the blood gushing out of his throat. His whole body was instantly blown into the dark night by the huge impact. Lin En said expressionlessly, it's interesting that you killed your own men so cruelly. The middle-aged man stared at Lin En gloomily and said, it seems that you already know. Lin En said lightly, yes. The middle-aged man pulled off his tie and said expressionlessly, in this case, it seems that we have no room for easing. I originally wanted to dig out your details after capturing you tomorrow, but now it seems that this time has to be advanced. Lin En smiled and said, do you think you can move my people? The middle-aged man's face was fierce, and he said, you are so arrogant. Today I will let you know that in front of the Grand Master, no matter how talented you are just an ant-like existence. He roared, and his clothes exploded instantly. On his arm, scarlet lines suddenly appeared. Dumen. Qin Kaiyang's face changed. That's right, the lines on his body are the external manifestation of opening Dumen. The magician has his own cultivation system, but correspondingly, the warrior also has a cultivation system that is opposite to the magician. The warriors below the Grand Master still cultivate their bodies and blood. But when a warrior grows to the peak of the Grand Master, if he wants to break through and become a Grand Master, he needs to further open up his human potential. The human body's potential is divided into 8 stages. Every time a stage is opened, the strength will soar to an extremely terrifying level. Because the martial artist's cultivation system was first created by the Celestial Dynasty, the people of the Celestial Dynasty also named the 8 stages that the human body can open after the 8 trigrams. Kinman, Kunman, Sunman, Genman, Kanman, Lyman, Genman, Dumen. And the first stage that the Grand Master can open is Dumen. After opening the Dui gate, the blood can flourish like the sea, and the warrior can directly step into the void with such flourishing blood. After reaching this stage, the magician's air advantage over the warrior is completely gone. Because the warrior at this stage is already able to walk in the air by controlling the terrifying blood. The middle-aged man's blood was burning all over his body, and he looked at Lin En coldly and said, since you are looking for death, then I will fulfill your wish. The next moment, he was burning with blood and roared towards Lin En in the air. His speed was too fast. Even at the moment he moved, he actually hit a sonic boom directly in the air. Lin En's eyes narrowed suddenly, and the purple light in his eyes flashed. In this case, he might as well test the limit of his defense here. He suddenly crossed his arms, and the wheels of rules of toughness and hardness engraved in his body were instantly activated. The next moment, there was a loud bang. The middle-aged man's terrible punch landed on Lin's crossed arms. Lin's body was pushed directly into the sky by the huge impact force like a cannonball. Hundreds of meters above the sky, Lin looked at his sunken arms and said expressionlessly. As expected, he is indeed a great master. His attack power can be said to be beyond that of an ordinary master. This punch should have 50 times the power of my punch. 1,000,000 kilograms of punching power. This is the power of the Grand Master. With one punch like this, a building might collapse in an instant. Lin casually placed a will of life on his arm, and the injury on his arm healed instantly. He said expressionlessly. But it's not that interesting. Through this punch, Lin En has almost figured out the limit of his current defense power. He can now at least withstand the impact of more than 1.5 million kilograms of force. If the punch force of 1 million kilograms didn't hit his vitals, such as his head or heart, he wouldn't need to worry about it at all. Because in his hand is the will of life. This is your biggest advantage. Above the floor. The middle-aged man suddenly raised his head, his eyes instantly traveled through the sky and fell on Lin En. But for a moment, a trace of shock flashed across his eyes. Because there was no trace of injury on Lin En's body. There were no wounds at all on the arms that were hit by him, and they didn't even turn red. How could it be? He took a step back in shock. He can be sure that the punch he just made didn't hold anything back. That was undoubtedly his full blow. He suddenly turned his head to look at Qin Kaiang, who was also extremely shocked, and said with a ferocious look. Didn't you tell me? His strength can only be equal to that of a grandmaster at best. Qin Kaiang trembled. No. This is impossible. When he injured me a few days ago, I could feel that his strength was definitely at the level of a grandmaster. Even if he is stronger than me, he will never be that strong. Otherwise, if he attacks me and my people, there is no need to go to such trouble. And at the moment he just finished speaking. Suddenly, a flash of lightning flashed across the night sky outside the window. The expressions of the middle-aged man and Qin Kaiang changed instantly. In the sky, Lin hugged his shoulders. Dark clouds turned over his head, and rolling thunder and lightning crackled across the sky. The lightning reflected on Lin En's face. Lin En looked down at the building expressionlessly and said. It's my turn. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 65. Just at that moment, the sky was already covered with dark clouds. In Jianghai City, men and women who were enjoying a nightlife amidst the lights and wine all looked up at the sky in astonishment. What's going on? The weather was fine just now, why did it suddenly thunder? This is unscientific. How can the weather change so quickly? And at this moment, a flash of lightning flashed across the sky again. This lightning directly illuminated the sky above the entire Jianghai City. And in this dazzling lightning, the people of Jianghai City instantly saw a godlike figure standing high in the sky, under the rolling dark clouds. There is a person standing in the sky. Everyone was shocked. Did you see it? There is a person. There is a person in the lightning. How is this possible? I must be dazzled. People looked up in shock and quickly took out their mobile phones to shoot at the sky. But in the dark night, except for the flash of lightning, no human figure could be photographed at all. Just when people thought that the scene just now was just an illusion. The next moment, a shocking scene happened. Crack! A flash of lightning directly cut through the sky above Jianghai City. They saw it. The figure in the sky appeared again, and this time when he appeared, the man moved. He raised his hand. He raised one hand to the sky, and the whole sky was instantly streaked with more than a dozen terrifying lightning. It illuminated the whole sky in an instant. The next moment, the dozen lightning bolts gathered into an electric current and fell straight towards a skyscraper in the distance. Boom! A terrible roar that almost the entire Jianghai City could hear. On the street, the glass of all the shops burst directly in this terrible shock. The cars on the road were even more out of control and hit the roadside, and the traffic lights were also affected and kept flashing. Everyone looked at the building hit by lightning in great shock. The upper floors of the building were already ablaze with flames, and countless pieces of rubble fell onto the road. Gods and gods! Could it be that the lightning that just surged in the sky was summoned by that man? Everyone stood there trembling, looking at the sky with trembling eyes. Boom! Another loud noise. Under the building that was struck by lightning, a man fell heavily from the sky onto a car on the ground. The car was instantly crushed from the middle, and everyone who saw this stood there in astonishment. The man crawled down from the car. His face had an extremely hideous expression, and there were traces of burning all over his body, and even his whole body was filled with electricity. He suddenly raised his head, looked at the young man standing in the void, and roared. Lin En! You are going too far. The next moment, under the gaze of everyone, he suddenly bent his body, and his body went straight towards the young man in the sky like a cannonball. The people who saw the scene finally reacted. They looked at the sky tremblingly and said, "Is it a battle between two strong men?" They immediately took out their mobile phones, turned on the camera and shot towards the sky. Everyone was full of excitement. They never expected that they could see a battle between beings of this level in their Jianghai city. This is at least a grandmaster or above. It's really exciting. This is the people of this era. Worshipping the strong has become the way of thinking of young people in this era. Above the sky, Lin En looked down at the middle-aged man who was rushing towards him, and said expressionlessly, "A warrior is a warrior after all. In front of a magician, you are destined to be prepared to be beaten. You can fly, but it doesn't mean you can master the air superiority." Lin En moved his fingers. In an instant, a purple light flashed in his eyes. The next moment, his fingers once again constructed a wheel of rules of lightning gathering. Since he had the will of heaven and earth engraved in his body, he could now construct one wheel of rules after another with just a thought. He didn't need to do anything, because the whole sky was his weapon. Crack! Crack! Countless lightning flashed over his head. With the force of thunder, he rushed madly towards the Grand Master flying against the sky. The Grand Master kept dodging the lightning attack, but the closer he got to Lin En, the denser the lightning he encountered. There was a loud bang. He was hit by a lightning bolt due to his negligence. The huge impact force instantly knocked him down from the sky. His body hit the edge of a building heavily, and then went down along the edge of the building and hit the center of an intersection heavily. Two cars that were moving were directly smashed out by the huge impact force, and the intersection was directly smashed into a big pit by the middle-aged man. There were car horns and people screaming everywhere. The middle-aged man looked up to the sky and yelled, "Lin En!" Lin En said expressionlessly, "Shut up." Almost at the moment when the middle-aged man raised his head, thunders rumbled down towards him like a waterfall. The entire intersection was instantly submerged in dense lightning. The people of Jianghai City took their mobile phones to shoot the sky, and once again showed an extremely shocked expression. The sky seemed to be out of control. Countless lightnings fell to the ground one after another. Such a scene was like a sky burial. So cool. So cool. Could it be that a god has come to our Jianghai city? Take a picture. Take a picture quickly. Those young people who did not return home at night instantly climaxed. When have they ever seen such a big scene? Although they know that the era they are living in now is an era of spiritual energy out of control, those who have not fought outside will never see such a scene that only appears in stories. Powerful warriors can split the sky with their hands, fight against fierce beasts 10,000 meters high, and regard all things as ants. A powerful mage holds the elements in his hands and can mobilize all the elements between heaven and earth, causing landslides and huge waves. These scenes that only appear in imagination actually appeared today. In Jianghai City. In the baptism of countless thunders, the crossroads was already a mess. And the next moment, the middle-aged man roared, and the blood in his body surged. In order to break out of the suppression of the thunder, he had to completely open his gen gate and let the blood spread throughout his body. The next moment, he ran madly into the distance, like a mad beast. He stared at Lin En in the sky, and the anger in his heart burned. Through this series of attacks, he already knew roughly. Lin En's strength has not reached the level of a grandmaster. His current real level is at most a grandmaster. Because if it was a grandmaster level mage, he would probably have died now. However, the method of casually summoning the thunder of heaven and earth suppressed him to the ground. This was not a suppression of strength, but a suppression of means. He knew. If he could get in touch with Lin En and let him collide with him head-on, he would definitely not be his opponent. No matter how strong his defense is, if he hits the vital point, he can still kill him. But the most important point now is how to get close to him. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Xuanhuan. Chapter 66. Another lightning bolt landed at his feet, directly knocking him away dozens of meters. Damn it! He stood up suddenly and roared to the sky. The next moment, he grabbed a car next to him and threw it towards Lin En, who was standing thousands of meters high. Everyone who saw the scene was shocked. The car shot straight at Lin En in the sky like a cannonball. Lin En raised his finger expressionlessly. In an instant, a will of law was constructed between his fingers. Storm gathering. A fierce gust of wind blew past Lin En. The car was directly swept away from Lin En's direction by the gust of wind, and flew into the sky while brushing against Lin En's body. And Lin En was so calm that he didn't even move his eyelids. And under the shocked gaze of everyone, the car was swept by the gust of wind in the sky, turned a huge corner, and then smashed straight towards the great master on the ground at a faster speed. Boom! With a loud bang, the car hit the Grand Master directly and exploded and caught fire instantly. Gods above! The people who saw the scene were shocked. It was as if the elements of the entire sky were obeying the man's orders. He really just moved one finger and instantly resolved the Grand Master's attack. Lin En looked down expressionlessly and said, "Are you still going to make a dying struggle?" There was no expression on his face, and he didn't even move. But the people on the ground immediately found in horror that the cars parked on the roadside seemed to have lost their weight and floated up to the sky. 1, 2, 10, hundreds. The next moment, people looked at the sky tremblingly. Hundreds of cars were suspended around a man, suspended in the sky thousands of meters high, reflecting dazzling light in the surge of countless lightning. The middle-aged man climbed out of the explosion in a panic. When he saw the terrible scene in the sky, even he felt a shudder in his heart. He took a step back tremblingly and said, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do?" Lin En said expressionlessly, "What do you think?" The next moment, hundreds of cars suspended in the sky fell towards the middle-aged man's position like meteorites. And those cars seemed to have received some kind of huge thrust, and their speed accelerated to the speed of sound in an instant. The cars that fell at the speed of sound, like meteorites. Boom! 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 Just like the end of the world, a violent fire exploded at the location where the middle-aged man was. The middle-aged man was hit and blood was dripping all over his body, and he screamed and ran wildly along the road. But those cars seemed to have installed an automatic positioning system. No matter where he ran, a car would fall down the next moment. His mentality has collapsed. His mentality is about to collapse. It's like a game that is playing with him from beginning to end. At the same time, his heart was filled with trembling, and even a huge panic had arisen. What kind of method is this? How did he do it? In this short battle, he had seen that Lin An used the elements of thunder and lightning and storm. And this ability to easily lift hundreds of cars. Could it be that? A word flashed through his mind in an instant. Gravity. He was shocked and looked at Lin An in the sky with great shock, trembling. This is impossible. This is absolutely impossible. What kind of mage are you? What type of mage are you? In his cognition, a mage can only control the corresponding ability in his life wheel. There are mages with dual attributes, but even among mages, they are 1 in a million. Could it be that he is a 3-element mage with 3 attributes of wind, thunder, and gravity at the same time? This is impossible. That's right. The method that Lin An used to lift hundreds of cars just now was because he constructed the will of gravity rules. It was just to make the car lose the restraint of gravity, which was not a difficult task for him. But for others, this was simply a miracle. Another lightning bolt and a car fell on his head. The body of the Grand Master was hit hard again, and his chest was surging with blood, and he spit out blood. Even though he was a Grand Master, under such unreasonable and intensive attacks, his body was already seriously injured. Lin An said expressionlessly, "Do you still want to resist?" The middle-aged man wiped the blood off his face and looked at Lin An in the sky with an extremely ferocious look. "I don't believe you can really kill me. You have used so many methods on me. I'm afraid you are now at the end of your strength." A cruel sneer suddenly tore off his face. "Your magician's mental power is the biggest obstacle to your strength. The more powerful the magic, the more mental power it consumes. Although I don't know how you can cast so many magics instantly, I absolutely don't believe that you didn't consume a little mental power." That's right. This is the biggest reliance of warriors against mages. Mages are very bad at sustained combat. Because every time they release magic, they need to consume their mental power. And once warriors can delay until the mage's mental power is exhausted, they will become sheep to be slaughtered. At that time, the advantages of being a warrior will be revealed. Strong physical fitness gives them the ability to sustain combat, and they can afford to consume. And he seems to have been suppressed by Lin An during this period, but in fact, he is also waiting for Lin An's mental power to be exhausted. Because he knows that at that time, it is time for him to take the initiative. Lin An stretched out his hand slightly, rubbed his temple, and said lightly, "I didn't expect you to really see it. My mental power is almost exhausted now." But a purple light flashed in his eyes. Several new wheels of rules were constructed by him. Magic gathering. Mental power breeding. Acceleration. In an instant, the sky and the earth changed color, and the magic power of the entire sky was mobilized by him. Even the surging magic power directly turned into a majestic vortex, which quickly rotated around him and was absorbed by him. Seeing this scene, the Grand Master's face suddenly turned pale. Lin An said expressionlessly, "I am not an ordinary magician. The gathering of magic power can allow him to quickly gather the magic energy particles between heaven and earth and be absorbed by him. The combination of spiritual power breeding and acceleration can quickly allow those magic powers to forge spiritual energy, thereby accelerating the generation of spiritual power. This forms a cycle of rapid recovery of spiritual power. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 67. Feeling the magic fluctuations that were constantly gathered by Lin An, the middle-aged man trembled and kept retreating. No matter how stupid he was, he couldn't fail to understand what the countless magic tides meant. For a mage, it was magic, and for a warrior, it was the spiritual energy that nourished the body. Although the names are different, the concepts are exactly the same. He had seen many mages use special means to attract magic particles between heaven and earth to nourish the soul after their mental power was exhausted, and then transform the soul into mental power. but it was the first time he saw a mage who could move his fingers and instantly attract the magic tide of the entire sky to nourish himself. This is impossible. How did you do it? This is absolutely impossible, the middle-aged man retreated in horror. If the previous escape and embarrassment were all to consume Lin An's mental power, then now, his heart has been completely replaced by fear. A mage who is not afraid of a war of attrition. What is this concept? This is equivalent to a bomber that can bomb infinitely. How can we fight this? How can we fight this? Lin An looked at him expressionlessly and said, "You should have realized this a long time ago." The next moment, Lin An raised his finger, and countless dark clouds began to gather in the sky. With a click, a flash of lightning streaked across the sky, and the sky suddenly became gloomy and rainy. Lin An did not intend to let him go. He was a very rational person, especially in battle. He would never show mercy to those who wanted to kill him. If you want to kill someone, you must be prepared to be killed. Lin An believed that he should have this awareness. The next moment, there was a continuous torrential rain in the sky, and the rain was only limited to the top of the man's head, and had no effect on other places in Jianghai City. Lin An said expressionlessly, "Do you still want to resist?" The middle-aged man was beaten all over, and he roared to the sky, saying, "Don't think you can kill me. No one in this world can kill me. You die." In an instant, he suddenly stepped on the ground and launched a second round of charge towards Lin An in the sky again. He didn't believe in evil. He didn't believe that Lin An could really achieve perpetual motion, and he didn't believe that Lin An could really stand in the sky and bombard him. The humiliation and anger of being played with made him almost lose his mind. Among the winners, he was high above, relying on his own strength and ability. He mastered a lot of wealth and resources. He hasn't been provoked like this for several years. And this time, in this small city, to be played with by this person who is obviously inferior to him in strength and rank, this is a huge stain on him. "Today, I will kill you." The middle-aged man was full of blood and energy. He went up against the sky and rushed towards Lin An madly in the thunderstorm. Lin An looked down at him indifferently, then waved his hand. In an instant, several wheels of law were constructed by him. Lightning gathering. Paralysis. When the two wheels of law appeared, the rainstorm in the sky changed dramatically. Inside the raindrops, crackling electric current flashed. Every drop of rain became a charged conductor. The charged raindrops fell on the ground, and instantly exploded with a crackling sound, and a rolling electric current emerged. All the electronic equipment on the ground was completely scrapped the moment they were wet by the rain. This is a rain of electric current that has changed the law. So how many drops of rain are there in the sky? Hundreds of thousands. 1 million? 10 million? And the next moment, the face of the middle-aged man who went up against the current changed drastically. His whole body was wet by raindrops, and every drop of rain that fell on his body instantly exploded with rolling electric current. What frightened him even more was that the paralysis brought by those electric currents was far greater than ordinary electric currents. Moreover, the paralysis of the electric currents even affected his control over his blood and chi. This was an electric current rain with an infinitely magnified paralysis effect. "You are so vicious." After the middle-aged man roared the sentence in humiliation, his upward momentum was instantly curbed. His whole body instantly stiffened and could not move, and the whole body was crackling with electric currents. The next moment, his body fell heavily from mid-air to the ground uncontrollably. A loud bang. His body smashed a deep pit on the road. Lin An looked down at him, and a trace of murderous intent flashed in his eyes. "It took so long, I should be able to kill him." The next moment, his fingers moved lightly, and a wheel of rules was constructed in his hand again. The wheel of loose trap. On the ground, the middle-aged man screamed, forced his body to control, and slowly stood up. His whole body was filled with electricity, and the water in the pit accumulated more and more, and the water also carried electricity. Even if he wanted to move, he had to use 10 or 100 times more strength than usual. But the moment he stood up, a trace of fear suddenly flashed in his eyes. He was standing on the concrete floor. But just now, he suddenly felt the hard ground beneath his feet dent. And at the moment he felt it, the ground beneath his feet collapsed instantly, and the entire ground became soft. The thick cement became as loose as sand in an instant. His body was caught off guard and fell directly downwards. A shrill roar. The middle-aged man struggled frantically and kept cursing at the sky. If it were his normal self, he would be able to drive his blood and fly directly out of the quagmire. But at this moment, the super paralyzing effect of the electric current made it extremely difficult for him to move. Not to mention crawling out of this terrible quagmire. Lin En, he roared fiercely at the sky. You can't kill me. I'm a great master-level warrior. Even if the sky falls, I can resist it. In the pouring rain, his voice was so angry that it almost broke. Above the sky, Lin En's face was not moved at all. He raised his finger expressionlessly and said, "Solidify." Instantly, a new will of law was constructed on his finger. The will of solidification. The middle-aged man who was trapped in the quagmire immediately felt with horror that the soft ground just now began to tighten instantly. In almost a second, the ground had instantly turned into a solidified concrete structure. His body was controlled in the concrete structure almost instantly. And the concrete structure was still squeezing towards the middle, and the huge force even made him feel a burst of breathing difficulties. But he laughed up to the sky, looking at Lin En with bloodshot eyes, laughing. Lin En, you made a fatal mistake. If it was in the quagmire, I would have no place to borrow strength, and with your electric current paralyzing me, it would be difficult for me to break free from your control. But, he said fiercely, you actually chose to control me in the solid ground. Are you underestimating the power of a grandmaster? He roared up to the sky, forcibly mobilized his blood and energy, and was about to break free from the restraints. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 68. He actually found that, with his own powerful strength, he couldn't break free from the seemingly vulnerable bondage. It was as if it wasn't concrete that was holding him captive. It was steel. Steel with extremely high toughness and hardness. This is impossible, he struggled hard in fear, but his body was constantly tightened. Not to mention breaking free, even moving became extremely difficult. What did you do? He suddenly looked up at Lin En, the fear in his eyes getting deeper and deeper. Lin En looked at him expressionlessly, with two wheels of rules flashing on his fingers. Solidity and toughness. He used these two wheels of rules to strengthen the concrete structure that controlled the middle-aged man. Let the solidified concrete take on the characteristics of steel. If he used his strength in his prime, he would have to spend a lot of effort to have a chance to break Lin En's bondage. But after being consumed for such a long time, his physical strength had long been lost. Now he couldn't break free from the bondage with these two characteristics. Now, he has completely become a turtle in Lin En's jar. The next moment, the sky full of lightning reflected on Lin En's profile, and his black hair danced wildly in the wind. Under the horrified gaze of the middle-aged man. Above the sky, countless raindrops began to gather towards the center, gradually forming a huge water ball that continued to expand. Water element gathering plus gravity. The water ball gathered more and more rain, and its volume continued to expand. After a few moments, the water ball had expanded to a diameter of more than 10 meters. Then, Lin En moved his fingers. The water ball instantly changed its shape and turned into a huge diamond-shaped cube. And the sharp end pointed directly in the direction of his head. The middle-aged man's brain made a loud bang and instantly became blank. Huge fear immediately emerged in his eyes. He panicked. This time he was really panicked. Because he had guessed what Lin An wanted to do. He really wanted to kill him. If controlling lightning, storms, and gravity just now didn't make him understand, then now, he has completely understood. He is not a dual attribute mage, nor a three-element mage, but a terrible one who can control everything. It was raining heavily, and he looked at the cube that was constantly taking shape with trembling eyes, saying, "Who are you?" The next moment, Lin An said expressionlessly, "Cool down, solidify." In an instant, the huge cube was instantly filled with cold currents. It began to freeze and solidify from the inside. After a few seconds, the huge cube had turned into a huge ice tower standing in the sky. The cold air instantly covered the surrounding high-rise buildings with frost. The middle-aged man looked at the sharp edges facing his head in fear, waiting for the fate of death. There is no way to resist anymore. Is there anything in this world that is more painful than waiting for death? And Lin An is still perfecting his masterpiece. Sharp, Lin An said lightly. The moment he said those two words, a cold light flashed on the sharp edges. Its power was once again raised to a higher level by Lin An. The next moment, Lin An turned his head and looked down at the middle-aged man who was controlled on the ground, and said indifferently, "See you in hell." When he said those four words, he moved his fingers casually, then turned around and stepped on the wind, walking towards home. Acceleration wheel. In an instant, the terrible cube that was completely condensed into ice was accelerated to a point beyond the speed of sound. Even the moment it fell, the air was cut straight in the middle. In those few microseconds, the huge cube landed precisely 1 millimeter away from the middle-aged man's head. The middle-aged man stared at the cube with a pale face. And at the last moment of death, he suddenly remembered. It seems that he has not touched him again since the first time he touched him. He raised his head and screamed miserably. No. The next moment, the cube fell straight onto the ground, and the terrifying speed instantly made the solid cube rush directly into the ground, becoming an eternal embellishment embedded in the ground. The world was silent. The people of Jianghai City looked at the dark clouds gradually dissipating in the sky, and then looked at the messy ground, and their whole bodies were trembling. Many people witnessed the terrible destructive power caused by the huge cube when it fell to the ground at close range, and that kind of palpitation may accompany them for the rest of their lives. The Grand Master is dead. On the road of Jianghai City, Lin An slowly fell from the sky. All the cars on the road braked and stopped, looking at Lin An falling from the sky in horror. They all recognized that he was the mage who stood in the sky and controlled lightning just now. Lin An put one hand in his pocket and walked along the road towards the direction of the martial arts hall expressionlessly. The cars on the road drove towards the sidewalks on both sides one after another, and actually made way for Lin An without any obstacles. Lin An took out the mobile phone he got from the previous man, dialed a number, and said calmly, "I'm Lin An. I've finished fighting. Come out and wash the floor." After hanging up, Lin An smashed the phone and threw it in the trash can on the roadside. He put on his hood, put his hands in his pockets, and walked towards the martial palace. The whole time, drivers and passers-by on both sides of the road looked at his back tremblingly, but no one dared to say a word. In the city hall, the four Grand Masters and the master of the martial hall, Zhao Heiran, sat nervously at the conference table. Wang Kaobei hung up the phone tremblingly, breathed a sigh of relief, wiped the sweat from his head, and said, "It's Lin calling." Zhang Heiran and the three masters widened their eyes and said, "How is it?" Wang Kaobei took a breath and said, "The fighting is over. He just informed us to go out and clean the floor." Zhang Heiran and the three masters could clearly see that their tense nerves had relaxed. Zhang Heiran smiled bitterly and said, "Well, our Jianghai City is really in trouble. The damage caused by Lin An this time is estimated to have caused direct economic losses of more than tens of millions. Wan Kobai shook his head, wiped the sweat from his head, and said bitterly, "Then what do you think we should do? Can we still hold Lin En accountable?" The three masters and Zhang Heiran shook their heads with a wry smile. Wan Kobai said bitterly, "Then what should we do now?" Zhang Heiran smiled bitterly and said, "What else can we do? Wash the floor. Early tomorrow morning, we will report this matter to Miss Banmen. Anyway, Lin En is now a member of the Chen family. What about Miss Banmen? You should also give us Jianghai City a little compensation." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 69. The next day. The battle that took place over Jianghai City last night went viral on the internet. On social platforms, 5 of the top 10 hot topics were occupied by this incident, and netizens' discussions were constantly updated at a speed of thousands of posts per second. I was at the scene last night, and I was the first to discover the man standing in the sky. That man is really terrifying. I have never seen such a terrifying mage. It's like a god. Is this the horror of the mage profession? Did you see it? That warrior had no ability to fight back in front of that mage. The internet has exploded. What shocked netizens the most was Jianghai City's attitude towards this matter. The impact of this battle was very large, and many buildings in Jianghai City were greatly damaged, but Jianghai City chose to remain silent. People even saw in the early morning that the army of Jianghai City directly surrounded the entire scene, and in the morning, a construction team was dispatched to repair the damage caused here. But from beginning to end, the top management of Jianghai City did not make any comments on this matter. All netizens are speculating how terrible the identity of that person is. It is so terrible that the top management of Jianghai City has remained silent. The next day, in the community, there was a knock on Lin En's unit door. With messy hair, dark circles under her eyes, and a gloomy face, Lin En opened the door. After not sleeping for a night, it was really unpleasant to be woken up just after falling asleep. Pulling the door open, a girl wearing a black dress, a black mask, and neat long hair stood at the door. She was wearing long boots, and her eyes were like purple stars, but her eyes were extremely calm. "Ban Meng," Lin En raised her eyebrows. "That's right, the person who came was Chen Daoming's daughter Ban Meng. Ban Meng has been staying in Jianghai City these days, 1 because there are many things for her to deal with after her father left, and 2 because there is a person here who makes her feel complicated. Just last night, she was on a high building, witnessing the battle between Lin En and the Great Master. She had already prepared for the battle. If Lin En got into trouble, she would immediately help him. But unfortunately, she didn't have the chance to do anything until the end of the battle. After the battle, she immediately received a call from the 4 masters. Lin En She looked at Lin En with a complicated look and said, "You are too high profile." Lin En's face showed a trace of impatience, especially after seeing her calm eyes. Before she finished speaking, Lin En grabbed her arm, dragged her in, and closed the door. A trace of panic flashed in Ban Meng's eyes. She had never been dragged into the house so rudely. She had thought of many ways for Lin En to behave when he saw her and how she would deal with it, but after being dragged, those ways of dealing with it instantly turned into bubbles and disappeared. Lin En took off the mask on her face, revealing her delicate cheeks, and then threw her on the sofa, saying lightly, "If you have something to say, just say it directly, don't use that tone of teaching, and don't wear a mask in front of me in the future." Ban Meng bit her lip, sat up straight, a trace of shame and anger flashed in her eyes, raised her head, and looked directly into Lin En's eyes. Lin En's mouth curled up, and her eyes met hers without any avoidance. A few seconds later, Ban Meng's eyelashes trembled slightly, and then she gritted her teeth and turned her head away, avoiding Lin An's gaze. She found that she couldn't calm down in front of this man. If someone else had been so rude to her just now, she might have killed that person the next moment. After a long time, she took a deep breath, looked at Lin An calmly, and said, "Can you not be so overbearing to me?" Lin An smiled and said, "Oh? Then what attitude do you want me to treat you?" Ban Meng bit her lip and said, "Be a little gentle." When she said this, even she felt a tremor in her heart. Because she had never made such a request to anyone before, this was like a little girl pitifully asking for candy. The moment she said it, she felt embarrassed and angry in her heart. But the words she had thought of in her heart, when they came to her mouth, they automatically changed into another way. This made her feel angry and confused. Because she found that every time she was in front of this man, she would lose control and become a girl. When Lin An heard her words, she was stunned at first, and then laughed. Ban Meng's eyes flashed with anger and shame, and her hands instantly clenched the hem of her skirt, and her eyes turned red unconsciously. Because she felt that she was being ridiculed. Lin An smiled and said, "This is what a normal girl should do. From now on, just stop being so arrogant in front of me. I can be as gentle as you want me to be." Ban Meng's eyelashes trembled, and she bit her red lips subconsciously and turned her head away. "I don't know any other way." Lin An smiled and said, "You can learn this slowly. For example, being a little bit obedient is very likable." "Be a little bit obedient?" Ban Meng asked softly. "That's right." Lin put his fist on his temple and said casually. Ban Meng shook hands and said in a low voice, "I understand." The surroundings fell into silence. Lin looked at the half-dream who said nothing strangely, and the time passed by minute by second. Almost half an hour later, Ban Meng bit her lip and said, "Can I speak?" There was silence all around, and there was only the sound of even breathing in his ears. Ban Meng raised her head and her eyelashes couldn't help but twitch again, because she found that Lin An had fallen asleep leaning on the chair. Ban Meng bit her lip and sat there sizing him up all the time. Until 3 poles high in the sun. Lin moved his nose, slowly opened his eyes, and sat up. He yawned, and when he saw the coat draped over him, he couldn't help but feel something in his heart. He came back to his senses and turned to look at the sofa next to him. She was still sitting there half asleep, looking at him. When she saw that he was awake, she quickly turned her head and said, "You just fell asleep." Of course Lin knew he was asleep. Anyone would definitely fall asleep in that state. He glanced at his home and was slightly startled. "I saw that the entire living room had a completely new look. After I came back last night and ate something casually, the leftovers and cans piled on the table were gone. The footprints on the ground and the dirty clothes that were casually changed last night were also gone. The smell of air freshener could be vaguely smelled in the air. The window was open, and his own washed clothes were hanging outside. On the table was a steaming breakfast." Lin An even thought he was dazzled, so he couldn't help but sit up and said doubtfully, "My sister is up." Ban Meng said calmly, "She probably didn't sleep well yesterday and hasn't woken up yet." Lin An looked at her doubtfully and said strangely, "Did you do this?" Ban Meng turned his head and said with an unnatural expression, "No. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 70. Lin An looked at the slippers on her small feet and the hand she was holding uneasily, and she understood everything in her heart. "I really didn't see it." Originally, Lin An thought that she was just like those pampered young ladies, with no other abilities besides good looks. But now it seems that this impression has to change. Lin An was in a good mood, sitting at the table and eating breakfast with a smile, and said, "Haha, that's weird. Well, this omelette is very well made and it suits my taste." Ban Meng turned around and asked, "Really?" Lin nodded and said, "Really." Banman turned his head and looked at the TV that was not turned on. His face quickly returned to a calm expression. But occasionally, those eyes would still turn around and watch Lin An eating with his peripheral vision. He seemed very uneasy, and he seemed to be really just paying attention casually. A few minutes later, Lin An sat on the sofa, looking at Ban Meng, who was sitting upright opposite, and said, "Tell me what you want to do with me today." Ban Meng took a deep breath, turned his eyes, looked at Lin An and said, "I want to know what happened last night and the identity of the man you were fighting." Yesterday, she witnessed the whole process of Lin fighting with that man. A strong man at the level of a Grand Master. Obviously, that person would definitely not be the local fighting force of Jianghai City. She had a vague premonition that this incident was definitely not simple. It was very likely that the Great Master and his father came to Jianghai City to meet Lin An. Lin An looked at her deeply and said, "Are you sure you want to know?" Ban Men's lips parted slightly, and he said, "Is it a force from the Kyushu region?" She had roughly guessed the whole story in her mind, because just last night, she found out that someone had been secretly monitoring Lin since this incident. An undercurrent has been flowing turbulently since Chen Daoming left here. Lin An said deeply, "Yes, according to the information I got from that man, they are a family named Ying from the Jiuzhu territory." Lin An quickly recounted the whole story and half-dream. After listening to this, Ban Meng fell into deep thought, his eyes shining with thought. Lin An leaned on the chair and said, "Obviously, someone over there has noticed me. I don't know the specific situation, but..." Lin An said calmly, "This time we sent a great master, maybe next time we will send a general." Ban Meng thought for a moment, raised his head and looked at Lin An, and said calmly, "I understand, Lin An, you don't need to worry about this matter. Since my father has decided to train you, then you are my Chen family, now and in the future. Anyone who dares to provoke you will be the enemy of my Chen family." She stood up and said calmly, "Tomorrow, there will be a result." At noon that day, Ban Meng called his father, who was far away in Jiuzhu territory, and truthfully reported what happened in Jianghai City to Chen Daoming. In the Kyushu domain, Chen Daoming's expression slowly turned serious as he was attending a high-level meeting. "I see." Chen Daoming hung up the phone and raised his head to look at the senior members of the major families in the conference room. He straightened the documents on the table and said, "I suddenly got some news, so I'm taking a break from today's meeting and I think I need to announce something." A white-haired elder asked doubtfully, "Chen Dao is called the god of Dharma. May I ask what it is about?" He raised his head and looked at the people at the table, his eyes as deep as the ocean. "I dare to ask everyone here, have I, the Chen family, been in charge of the 9 provinces territory for so many years? How kind have I been to you?" The expressions of the representatives of the major families at the conference table changed slightly, and they quickly stood up and said, "There has never been anything bad. A few decades ago, the order of the 9 provinces territory collapsed. If it were not for you, the Taoist Dharma God, to turn the tide, the 9 provinces territory would have collapsed long ago, and our major families would not have developed to what they are today." "Brilliant." Chen Daoming said deeply, "Then I would like to know how you explain what happened in Jianghai City yesterday." As soon as these words came out, many people's faces showed a look of confusion, many people's expressions changed slightly, and some people's foreheads were instantly wet with sweat. At that moment, Chen Daoming could see the changes in the expressions of everyone present. His eyes fell on an old man sitting in the corner of the conference room. His eyes flickered and his face turned blue and white. Chen Daoming raised his head, looked deeply at the old man, and said, "Representative of the winner, you might as well come and explain to me what it means to treat you badly, and what it means to draw fire from under the cauldron." The winner's representative instantly felt waves of cold air behind him, and his face instantly turned pale. All eyes were focused on him. He knew clearly that over the years, Although Chen Daoming rarely took action and did not look aggressive or domineering, he would never forget that Chen Daoming was one of the first batch of people to emerge from the historical stage. People under siege. Of the people of that era, no one had their hands stained with blood, and no one was killed who made the world tremble. The aura that came naturally from his body almost made him reveal everything. The winner representative quickly stood up and knelt on the ground in front of Chen Daoming, sweating profusely, and said, "Daoming fashion, I really don't understand what you mean." He knew that if he admitted it now, then he was finished, and the winner was finished too. Because they were the executors of the incident against Lin En. Chen Daoming leaned back in his chair, looking at the documents in his hand, and said casually, "Are you confused as to why I have to add a seat there every time I have a meeting?" The family representative at the conference table immediately looked at the empty fifth chair. This position is very special. In the Zhu domain, the first 4 chairs are the families represented by the 4 most powerful world-class beings in their Zhu domain. Chen Daoming of the Chen family is the first chair. And the 4 seats after the 4th chair also belong to the 4 major families. They are the Tianjia venerables of the 4 major families. This was the ruling pattern established after Chen Daoming and others entered the Zhu domain. The 8 highest seats were all controlled by their 4 major families, which formed the absolute control of the Zhu domain by their 4 major families. Moreover, these 8 positions have been written into the highest constitution of the Zhu domain. The 4 major families led by Chen Daoming. The seats of the 4 major families headed by the Chen family Tianjia Venerable. These are the 8 highest powers in their Zhu domain. But since the accidental death of the Chen family Tianjia Venerable, Chen Daoming has not added anyone to this position. But at every meeting, no one dared to forget the vacant seat. Because as long as Chen Daoming is alive, no one dares to shake the power represented by that position. Chen Daoming raised his head and looked at the family representatives present, and said calmly, "Since you all understand what that position means, then you should also understand that that position should be higher than anyone present in the system sequence of Zhu domain, right?" The faces of the representatives of the major families present changed, and they stood up quickly and said, "Yes, Daoming fashion." Chen Daoming crossed his hands, looked at them deeply, and said, "So what do you think, if someone in our system openly provokes that position and takes illegal actions that may lead to his death, what should we do according to the law?"